if you're not making films about life, you're making films about films. And I do feel like there is a lot of that happening sometimes, in which you're not seeing a person making a film about a thing that has happened or they've experienced or they want to communicate, but they're basically saying with their piece of art, oh, I loved Toy Story, let me show you my version of Toy Story, you know?
Everybody, this is Rodrigo. Welcome to another episode of Shot Talk. This week we have on the episode Simon Wilches. Simon, thank you for being on.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. Thanks for having me, man. It's very
Absolutely.
exciting.
No, I'm really excited because your friend Nigel sent out a list of recommendations, and you were on that list, and I checked out your stuff, and I was super impressed, man. You do some really impressionistic work, I guess, like is a good one way to say it.
Yeah,
So,
awesome. Thank you.
yeah, I'm curious because a lot of your stuff is very painterly, very like a moving painting. So I'm guessing you had a fine arts background before you started doing animation, or?
Yes, I come from Colombia, and I went to a visual arts school. Colombia, as many other countries that are in the United States, Canada, or France, maybe Japan, they don't have a strong industry, so, and not a strong education in animation. So most people do it empirically. Unfortunately, that's the opportunity that we get with technology now. But so that's how I started in my hometown, which is a very small town in Colombia called Popayán. And I graduated from my high school after a very traumatic sort of experience, because I wanted to do CGI. I had seen that word on television, the Discovery Kids channel. I was like, I want to do CGI, and I was really trying to pursue it. And I had a vocational guidance teacher or something, and she said to me, stop making stuff up. Just figure out if you want to be like a doctor, an engineer. I don't want to be anything. Fortunately, my parents were very supportive. So after I graduated high school, I just stayed at home and found out through the internet, which was very young at the time, this website called Duty.com, which is a guy making
Duty.
Duty.
He's a former Simpsons animator, right?
Yeah.
Oh man, yes. Continue. I know what you're talking about. This is fantastic.
He used to make this poop jokes, in very little gifs in '98, I think.
Totally.
So that was popular at the time, and he listed the things he used, and he's like some tablet and this software called Flash, and I was like, ooh, I want to download a trial of that pirate, and then started doing it for a year until my parents were like, okay, this is fine, but you need to figure out what you're gonna do for your career, and your sister now knows that this new major in Bogota, capital of Colombia, called visual arts. Mm-hmm. And I went to visual arts with no art background myself and no artist aspirations. I just wanted to be an animator. So I went in, I did my test, came with one of the 3/4 discs at the time, like diskettes they called them. And
oh my God, the not the literal floppy, but they were called floppy disks.
Yeah, the floppies, but the ones that go a little bit solid, smaller. And
bringing me back between Duty.com and the floppy.
it's an ancient history. And then and I had no portfolio. I had no still lives, portraits, nothing. I just had a disc in my interview, and I showed it, and they didn't have a way to read it because they were upgrading computers in the university, and they only had CDs. And they found this very old computer, and it was an X-file.exe because I had no way to export, and it knew nothing. And I did this very weird film, which is kind of like a Eastern European parody film. And I didn't say I made it, I only say I translated it into Spanish.
You said Eastern European parody?
Parody,
okay,
film,
okay.
Yeah. And because I was trying to make fun of the visual art, pretentious art.
Totally, yeah.
So I was like, I'm not gonna get accepted, but I'm gonna tell them what I think of your, little thing.
Your scene.
And then I showed it to them, and they were so impressed. I was like, no, what studio did you make this in? I was like, I have my house in my town. And basically I used animation throughout the 4 years of my major in visual arts. I didn't do sculpture, painting. I mean, I learned how to draw, but I mostly did animation in every form.
Did they take that film as non-parody, or did they understand that you were joking?
They took it as non-parody.
That's what I figured. That's what I thought.
When I graduated, the guy who did my interview came to me and he said, "Oh, I saw your thesis, and I'm actually relieved because none of the things you did throughout the 4 years were as good as your admission film." And I was like, "Damn." Which is interesting because later this thing has played on very much, like things that I do out of like parody or spite
Right.
are like the
Satirical,
best
right?
things that I do. So
Yeah.
so after that, it didn't teach me animation per se. It gave me time to do a lot of animation, practice, and also it enriched my, visual vocabulary. So all the impressionistic stuff and expressionistic stuff that is in my work is mostly reflecting, basically learning like hardcore art and, being from Colombia, which is another story.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because most people, there's this sentiment that like, oh, I wish we could go back to the good old 2D days and this and that. But it's interesting how from the onset you wanted to do CG, and then you end up doing, up until now, it's been an entire career of 2D, right? So
Yeah.
that's usually, you usually hear the other story, you know what I mean? Where people
Yeah.
want to do one thing and end up doing CG.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that going to visual arts, if I had gone to like some technical school, like something that was specifically 3D, who knows what the story had been. But you start like going deep into the subjects of art, and that you start realizing, or at least I started realizing what moved me as an artist, right? And my thesis from that time was like 15-minute film, which nobody wants to see, but it was like this exploration of like all these fears that I had as a person, and I was like, that's really good. And I went deep into research. It had like religion, so I started like for a year I started exploring religions. Went to a Krishna temple.
Oh wow.
Colombia is very Catholic, so I became like hardcore Catholic for a while, only trying to figure out like what is this all about, right?
Yeah.
And then in the process, I was certainly not interested in CG anymore. I just wanted to like just answer these questions that I had. And after I graduated, Colombia was in a very political like charge moment, very much like the U.S. right now, and my interest went immediately there. Like, we need to say something about this. We need to do something about this. So we started doing a web show. So I think in the process of making all this, like CG actually went to the back, and I still liked it. But I only got to explore it when I moved here, and I went to start my master's at USC. And realized I don't care about this. I don't want to do it.
Yeah. I mean, you have such a flair to your work that it's funny to me that you wanted to go to something where you actually have to fight the technology to get it to look so immediate, like the like versus just a painting, right? That's crazy. Like, you jumping into religion is completely fascinating to me because I feel that's almost like a actor method where they'll you hear stories about like Matt Damon. He was like a bartender for like a year because he had a role he had to get ready for. But for you, did you primarily jump into Catholicism to sort of like soak up what that was for?
It's interesting because my undergrad was an approach to art which was very research heavy. So maybe it was method in a way. It's like, if you're going to talk about something, be sure you know what you're talking about, versus like a spontaneous approach of just express yourself, whatever comes out. So that's how I learned how to make art, which is, some people think that's not the best way, but at least it taught me how to read, in terms of like reading a lot and how to understand stuff. And it stuck with me because most of the films that I've made after have been, if I'm not imbued in the subject, then I don't feel I can make a film about it, right? I do a lot of commercial stuff, and even that I try to like do stuff like understand what is behind those things. But on my personal work, that film Semáforo, that is my most famous film to the moment, and it's been the most successful one in terms of festivals and awards.
That's the one in the circus,
in
right?
the circus, yes.
That's some really nice camera work and
yeah.
very
And
dynamic.
I won't talk too much about it, but I do say, but to make that, I came with this idea that was started because I was working with this production company in Colombia that was doing like very like intense journalism in areas affected by violence. So it was this journalist that would go to the areas, and they needed somebody to animate maps to describe the routes of massacres. And they would give me a map, and they would give me these, reports and they were like heartbreaking and shocking because it was describing everything that happens in a massacre.
Wow.
Which I was not expecting to get that deep, but I was like reading the description of the images, the sound, all these things, and it was like right there. And if you live in Colombia, you experience it's kind of changing right now, but if you live in Colombia, you experience the effects of violence very close. It happens mostly in the country, but a lot of refugees fly into the cities. So you see them like under street lights, begging for money, putting on shows, to like get something, or if they've stepped on a landmine or gotten burned, they also like beg for money with that, and that was the inspiration for the film.
Wow. Now I understand the ending message when you said this is for all the people underneath the street light, and I thought maybe he meant to say spotlight, but no, you were literal. You meant the corner.
It was
of
a
the
play
street.
on words and sort of that, and that's what sparked the circus, right? I came with that, I had images of that film in my brain. I was like, I need to put them out. And I didn't even know if I wanted to them painted or colored pencil. I was thinking at first like something like Bill Clinton-esque. But then I got here, they said, make a film. And I was like, this is the time to make the film. And it had been so much time since I had done those maps till today, that I felt like I need to get into some sort of like mood to make this film. So it was done very quickly. It was pre-made, like, a semester of sort of like thinking about it, doing storyboards, and then it was like like a month base of animation, just very intense. Like I wouldn't leave my apartment. And I was just playing all these films, like Roman Polanski films or nothing animation actually, but just like things that would get me into this mood that I felt I needed to be, because right now I was in sunny California. Like, how do I?
Right.
So I just locked myself in my apartment for like a month, and then just painted that thing out. And when it came out, it was very strange because I put it out here. People appreciated the technique of it, which is a technique that I had never explored before. But people in Colombia got it. Like, they understood what it meant.
Wow.
And the film was very successful. It was my first film at USC. It got a Student Academy Award nomination. It got Annie Award nomination. It won like a big Adobe Award prize, Achievement Award. Every festival, like, it's the top 10 list, like boom, 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 boom. And I was like, holy.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say, as somebody, from the United States, and obviously who grew up in this culture, not knowing the historical and the political, baggage that it had, I still thought that it was very visceral and very, like you said, the technique was something to look at. So, but even beyond that, I thought like there was very harsh emotion, and I didn't know what it was tied to. But I watching it, I thought there's an energy here that's a little disturbing, but it's done, in a cool way, in a very artful way. So that's interesting to hear the backings behind it. It makes a lot of sense now.
And I'm a huge fan. Before I started making animation, I was a huge fan of animation history, and I could, I have this big folder organized by year, country. It's very obsessive, of films, animation films from the world, and it's tied to when I started getting the internet and LimeWire and Kazaa and like all those things. Because I was so obsessed with getting animation since I wasn't making it. I wanted to like be a part of it. So I became a huge fan of like Eastern European animation from like 60s, 70s, and at the time I didn't know what those were or meant. And then you read about them later, or you find out, and everything kind of like makes sense. But as you said, like the energy that they transmit makes you wonder like what is going on in this time. So I feel like as fine arts in a museum, these independent short films, or sometimes state-produced films from these countries, they do represent a way of life or a way of thinking of people in time. Mm-hmm. So I feel that's what I wanted to achieve with Semáforo.
Yeah, that's neat. I mean, I think you're seeing that a lot in the United States right now, when people are trying to capture the moment and capture the energy and the feeling, and that's, I guess, you could argue that's important, because it's almost like a record of a time and a place, right? And more than, I guess, historical data and statistics, you want to capture, give a person, I guess maybe a slice of what's with the feeling of it, right? The feeling of the air. You know what I mean?
And
So
it's interesting because I was a very bad student when in high school in school, and I realized later you need to understand. I actually was flunking philosophy when I was in college, and my father brought this historian to kind of like help me. It's like I needed somebody to teach me philosophy, and the first thing he said to me was like, the problem with you young people at the time was that you guys don't, you think like everything starts when you read it. You don't put things in context. And that was so interesting to me because at the time I could recite like this history of the X-Men. I loved comic books and I could tell you everything that happened in order, why things make sense here and not here. And I was like, wow, why if I apply this to like other stuff?
Oh, I see.
And I started realizing that through animation and these shorts, it started to make sense of history. Like history started to make sense to me because, oh, this thing might have happened in the 60s because it has these certain characteristics. And sometimes it might be very specific to the time, but it kind of like makes sense visually in a way like, the way history of humanity has been moving. And I do think like when we look at stuff that is being made today about the United States, much like comics from the 60s,
right.
In San Francisco, you will understand what was going on in the country, So
right.
I think that's valuable.
I think that's a mark of a good film is because that's something that I think artists shoot for, right? It's like when you make a film, you're hoping that, I always like to say that like, it's not so much the information, but it's you're as a filmmaker, you're hoping that the audience is sharing experience with you, right? And that's the hardest thing is trying to infuse that in there.
And I mean, on the flip side, I think like these are things that are specific to a time. Like Colombia just went through a peace process. So the hope is that you will see less of these people begging for money on the streets. So most likely future generations, if things go well, won't understand what it is. But I do hope that the execution transmits this feeling, right? This is a non-narrative film.
Right.
So one of the things that I've kind of learned is my next film, which I'm doing right now, is it's hoping to be a little bit more universal.
Okay.
So it's not as a specific situation, but more like a specific feeling or emotion we all feel. Like,
sure. I was gonna say when you talked about the tutor that you had for philosophy, I don't know, I forget the exact technical term, but there's this effect of when you know very little about a subject, your confidence in it is very, very high. But then as you get deeper and deeper into the study, you start to realize that the more you become an expert at it, the more you become aware of it, the more you start to realize, oh, I don't know anything about this. And I feel like maybe that's what he was speaking to, where he said, oh, these kids, they think they know everything. But then once you get in, you're like, oh.
And I do think he also was saying that in a very like, not aggressive, but very blunt way was, things make sense if you kind of pay attention to things, you know, like, so it wouldn't make sense that, I don't know, postmodernism to be happening, before modernism, just because.
Oh, sure.
I know it can get very academic if I talk about it, but the lesson was just pay attention, and that's how I learned history. Like I can tell you a lot of history of countries only based on the short films, because it's also a gateway of curiosity. So you want to know what happened, and then you realize this is what they were going through, and then it's before the Berlin Wall fell, the USSR crashed. So it kind of like makes sense in a huge like timeline.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. That's really interesting. I've never heard of somebody piecing together world history specifically through short film, but now I'm kind of curious. Now maybe you should write a book or something, or a class or something. That'd be fun. So you said you did graduate work out here in the United States.
Yeah.
And then what then was the next step that led from making that short film into a career in Los Angeles?
Yeah. Well, I was very fortunate. I didn't come here. I didn't come too young to study. Like I was already like in my 30s or starting my 30s, and I think like it was very, very aware of that when I was in school, because I was with very young, 20s, early 20s, mid 20s. Very few people of my age, but I had such a clear idea of what I wanted to get out of the program. So I think I was very focused on what I wanted to make. Making that film opened my career because every person in festival saw it. And I started getting being here in Los Angeles gave me access to a lot of people, interested people that can give you a job. Could have happened in Colombia. I would have been probably in the same place. The ego would have been boosted, but nothing practical could have happened. So I kept I got a pitch at some big cartoon studio and stuff that you were just dreaming when you started the masters. And as soon as I graduated, I kept saying I'm gonna need to graduate, for my visa. I kind of drop out, but as soon as I graduate, I get an email from the studio that I currently work on, as also a bunch of storyboard tests and stuff, which was funny because I don't think people reacted a lot to the clown in the film.
Yeah.
They were like, "Oh, you make clowns? That's kind of for kids. You are interested in working in cartoons for kids?" So it kind of never worked out, except for the studio that with Titmouse, which is the studio that I currently work in, and they just reached out to me, via email. And I guess it was happenstance that they were looking for animators 2D Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And my thing popped up on Vimeo, and they called me. I did a test. I started working in this. Nothing of this very intellectual, heavy thing. Is more can you animate on this show for Disney XD? And I said, sure. It was called Kirby Buckets, and it was a great show because it was live action animation, and the animation bits were self-contained, and they were 1 minute, 2 minutes. So it was doing GIFs basically for this show. And it was a show run by a guy who used to do Beavis and Butthead. He used to write for Beavis and Butthead, I think. So it was very
It's a funny thing to think about that there was writers on that show, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, so he had a very different approach to tween television because this was a show for tweens. That a kid that wanted to be an animator.
Okay.
So I just started it gave me the opportunity to animate something disturbing, but still in a very kind of commercial way. I had a great director, Freddie Christie, and it was a great time to get into the studio because it was very creative for being a show for Disney. And we worked on that show. It was extremely very successful for a while, and then I worked there. And in the meantime, Titmouse has a thing called 5-second day, which is they allow every person in the studio to make a film, 5 seconds minimum to whatever they want, and people do incredible stuff in that within those boundaries. So I had been told, and I had read an article about it where it said some person at the studio, she started as an animator, and then because of this film her career exploded. Now she's a lead character designer. And I read that and I was like, I want to have that story.
Totally. Yeah.
And so I started researching what do people do here for 5-second day, and most somebody told me they mostly do action or very crass humor, and I was like, well, I'm actually going to do something that is the opposite of those two, which is very pretentious French film. So this is when I'm saying going back to how I applied to college.
Yeah.
So I decided to make this film called The Vertical Chip, which is this very existential film. I got this friend who's from France to narrate it, and it's inspired from The Night and the Fog by Alain
He
Resnais.
narrated it in French.
He narrated in a French accent.
Oh, fantastic! Of course you got a French guy to do that.
Yeah. So I did want people to understand the idea, so I didn't make it absolutely in French, but it was based on this documentary called The Night and the Fog by Alain Resnais, and it's a documentary about a concentration camp. It's just really bad, But it's the French, the idea of a French documentary. It's that documentary is heavy, very conceptual phrasing of narration. Images don't describe what he's saying and stuff like that. So I decided I'm gonna make a film that is like that, and the
It's gonna stand out like a sore thumb for sure.
Yeah, and it was the time where like all the ISIS beheadings were being shown on TV.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of like commentary about those, how like, ooh, you know, like Middle East people, like all these things. I was like, well, I'm gonna make something about religion again. How like we judge other things we don't know from the comfort of our chairs.
Right.
And then, so it's basically a film about a guy who's eating Doritos when he's looking at like the news, these beheadings, and he's like eating these Doritos, and then one gets stuck in his palate, the roof of his mouth, and then he starts to choke, and he starts begging God to please save him. So it's like the Dorito is a triangle, and there's an image of God being in this triangle. So it's like a lot of visual association, and it's narrated by the French guy. And at the end, he dies, you know. And then,
tragically.
So yeah, God doesn't save him. So how cruel he is. So anyway,
The vertical shift.
the vertical, it's online.
It's pretty profound, man.
And then put that in. The reaction was as expected, like a few chuckles, but mostly like everybody was like, "What's this concert?" And but then I got approached by the people from the studio and saying like, "Hey, we like the film. Like
Wow.
it certainly met the effect that I wanted. And then do you want to direct like this 15-second interstitials for Adult Swim?"
Wow.
So I started doing those. And with the same, like I started realizing, oh, this painted thing kind of works out. People react positively to it. And it is not just like using paintbrushes. It's like this weird glitch that I found out in Photoshop that allows me to do this weird thing.
Huh.
So I kept on doing it. It's hell. Like I hate it. Every time I animate on it, I'm like, why do I do this to myself? What is this desire to stand out? I need to see a therapist about it.
Maybe it's the Catholic thing.
Yeah, maybe
just the
punishment.
self-hatred.
Yeah. So the thing that happened was I started doing these things, and being like this independent filmmaker that I had been because of college, I could not just do them, but I also started submitting them to festivals, being very self-confident about them. And fortunately for me, they started getting into Annecy, Ottawa.
Wow.
And the studio noticed, and then, little by little, I started like going up, and then I ended up directing stuff of the sort, like very different projects. Mm-hmm. Most likely never to this point like TV series, but like stuff that is very out there.
Well, I saw you did Game of Thrones. Yeah. You animated some stuff, and they had the JRR talk about certain scenes in it, and it's funny because as I was going through your work, I eventually get to that, and I think that's so cool that, and it's as you described, somebody saw that I guess that visual quality and thought, oh, this is going to be perfect for something like Game of Thrones, which is supposed to be sort of like feel a little bit like antique and like old world, and yeah, I thought that was a perfect use of the stuff of the body of work you had so far, and then putting that next to that property was really nice. I thought. Yeah.
That was a strange. That actually happened. I was doing it outside of the studio, like working freelance for Starburns, and I had done with them this thing called Party Legends, which is a very common format now that some celebrity tells you like how wild they were, in parties, and then you animate it. So they liked what I did. I did one for Fred Armisen, the guy from Portlandia. And the producer from that project, he really responded to the work and he really liked it. And he came to me and my friend and he said, would you guys like to do something for Game of Thrones? But not only that, for Apple. I was like, why are you coming to us for Apple? Like Apple is all sleek and cool and we're just like messy,
Right.
And I don't know, like it ended up happening. So we worked with my friend Einar Baldwin, which is also a very accomplished animator. He went to USC with me. And the way we did it is like, because I'm a little bit less expressive than he is, expressionistic, I'd say. I ended up animating the base and he painted it.
Okay.
And what came out was like this very interesting looking thing that I do feel like if you think of Game of Thrones, it is probably something that could have come from that world, like not maybe the look, but it's some, like Jon Snow was doing his own animation.
Like scribbling on the snow
Yeah.
or something, like using blood from his fallen enemies and
yes, exactly.
And doing something like
to
that.
do animation, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I thought it was really striking. It's really neat. I like that you sort of you're deliberately positioning yourself to Not necessarily give, I guess, the people what they want per se, but you're going for a very specific feeling or a very specific idea, and that's risky. Like you hope that the right people see it, but so far it's cool that it's been working out for you, because I've even in my own personal stuff, I've been in positions where I'm doing a film contest or I'm doing something for the internet, like on Newgrounds or something, and I tell myself like, okay, everybody's probably going to do this, but I want to be a little bit of a troublemaker and try this instead. And so far, like it's fun, and it's also sometimes you never know who's going to see it. So
Well,
that's
part of the journey of becoming an animator and becoming an artist is also learning how to know myself really well. And this is like going back to the past a little bit. When I was in USC, they asked us to do this thing. We were in the middle of thesis. Nobody wanted to do anything but finish that film. And then all of a sudden this professor comes like, hey, we have this seminar, it's not non-credit, but there's the anniversary of Lewis Carroll's collection at the library, like something very specific that really nobody cared about. Everybody was just like finish the film. But you all have to make it. Like you all have to do a film because it's going to be projected in the library.
okay.
And I was like, I don't want to do this. And I was already a grown man, but I was being a child about it. Like, I don't want to do this. So I decided we had to pitch our ideas. So I'm going to do something very raunchy. Like, so they say, don't do this, please. And then I'm free.
Right.
Because then I'll say, like, if you don't want to let me express myself, then I won't do it.
Right.
That was the plan. And then I put on like this weird performance. I dressed up, like button up my shirt to here. I had like note cards. Very nerdy like approach to presenting, and I was like gonna do something because Lewis Carroll, of course, famously did Alice in Wonderland, and I was gonna do something. This very weird idea of how like it's basically inspired on. I was telling my friend yesterday actually, like inspired on Bram Stoker's Dracula, like this idea in Victorian era that the approach to knowledge was something like related to eroticism. So it's like, oh, you open a book, you don't know what you're gonna see. So these women are looking at the Kama Sutra. So I was like doing this thing of how like Alice, this idea that Lewis Carroll was like these sexual things with little kids. I don't know. So this how going into a library is sort of like a journey into womanhood. And it's very erotic. So as I was saying all these ideas, I was showing these very raunchy images of sexy Alice in Wonderland costumes and a lot of like images of like sexified Alice in Wonderland. So it was like kind of like making a joke of this nerdy approach. And I dropped my cards and I'm sorry, I need to pick them up.
Oh, that was staged and everything?
Yeah, it was all staged. It was ridiculous.
That's fantastic.
And then I was like, oh, instead of doing the Cheshire Cat, his eyes, I'm just going to do, boobs. And
for his eyes.
and then the caterpillar is just going to be a giant penis. So it's like hoping that they go like, no, don't do it. But they actually ended up liking it. And I think like that was my downfall, which is like put so much effort into this thing that it's like, awesome, do it. We did it. They projected it in the library. It's online. You can see the projections. And it's very intense. I worked with my friend Lamar, who did the sound. And he was very doubtful at the beginning because he was not this kind of person. So I convinced him to work with me. And he came up with the most fantastic sound design for it. And we put it out. It was 15 seconds. It was something ridiculously short, or maybe less than a minute. It got accepted into the Ottawa Film Festival, which is one of the biggest festivals. And I was like, I can't believe this is happening. But that's going back to knowledge. It's like, there is this energy that I managed to gather when I don't want to do things. That results in good films, like this is the most honest energy I can tap, I guess.
Absolutely.
So I've been trying to
I think some of my favorite artists and filmmakers oftentimes I always think that they're half trolls because they know that they're going to push certain buttons and they're doing it deliberately, but oftentimes that's usually you either get you might get the unexpected end result, which in your case, accolades and being accepted into film festivals. But then there's also that fun of sort of like fucking with the audience a little bit of like, oh, you it's not exactly what you expected, but it was still something to look at, still something to behold. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I do think that there is when I go see a film, I do want to feel challenged. You know, I want to be entertained, but in a way, I want to leave the theater with some idea. Of course, I've done many other things that are not this, that I'm just like, okay, put my head down and just do whatever they want. Good. But which is also good, you know, because I feel like if I was just like this rebel, then probably I wouldn't have a career. I was just, you know, it's balancing the moments in which you can like inject your stuff. And now strategically, I think like how can I get people to seek this energy more for the thing that it is? And I do think it's kind of working in a way that people just see these results and they go, oh, something interesting going on here. Can you inject it into our new thing that I want to put out?
Interesting.
Which is the Emperor's New Clothes. That's kind of like what happened. They asked us for, and this has so far been my highest profile work.
So this is a music video that you.
It's a musical.
A musical.
It's a 30-minute musical. No, I mean it's very much based on music, and it's.
And you helped direct this, or you directed it?
I directed it.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah.
It was commissioned by HBO. It's written by this legendary person called Sheila Nevins, who has been the head of documentary at HBO for 40 years or more, and she has won like the most amounts of Emmys after Lorne Michaels or something. It's like if you look at her Wikipedia, it's very impressive. She wanted to make she was retiring from the job, and she wanted to make a musical about the Emperor's new clothes. Kind of like responding to the time a little bit.
Sure.
You know, and her being a documentarian. So it was supposed to be for kids, and it is still for kids. So it's for kids, and it wanted to be is 30 minutes, a lot of songs by this guy called Will Finn, who is a Broadway, you know, guy. And we didn't have the talent at the time, but it ended up being with Alan Alda, Jeff Daniels. Originally, it was supposed to be very conventional, but they chose me, and we brought in this art director called Galen Pearson, who is also crazy. And you know, we needed to be a little bit like economic about it because the budget wasn't like huge, but it was, you know, good enough. Mm-hmm. So I decided to design it sort of like the UPA kind of approach, but more than UPA, I wanted to be like Bauhaus, sort of flat but design heavy.
Okay.
A big inspiration was this guy called Oscar Schlemmer, which did a thing called the Triadic Ballet. If you look it up, it's one of the best things ever. It's like this ballet made of like figures. It's not animation; it's actual real life ballet.
Okay.
But visually, it's very striking. So it's like if we can make this, we can use all the power of like Flash to animate this very quickly in the time we have. And because of this economy and because of the energy that Galen brought in and I had, this weird mixture came up, and I am very proud of it. Like I think it looks like nothing that is out there in terms of animation at the moment, and it has strong like tones of like the Yellow Submarine, which is one of my favorite films.
Yeah.
And the UPA, but also like modern art. So I feel like that, and this weird like insanity that we both brought into the project. We were very lucky to have, the studio was Starburns who produced it. We were lucky to have them, but also HBO, because they were keeping it like still for the audience. Mm-hmm. But you know, kind of like this mixture of things ended up giving us like something that I do feel like adults would also be interested to see.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And I wonder if this producer that you worked with, you said that she was on her way out of the job. So yeah. I wonder if that, because you know how it is, sometimes you come with a very bold artistic idea and then you get pushback from the studio. But it seems like, I don't know. I wonder if that helped sort of let her be a little more accepting of any sort of direction. She was just good the whole time.
Very cool about it. You know, she had a very specific, she wrote the main outline. The songs were written by this other guy. But she was very good to letting us do what we wanted. And it was very nice because I think we exceeded what she wanted, because we ended up extending it in duration at first. It was supposed to be shorter. And I think like she wasn't experienced enough in the making of animation. She
Right.
knew what she wanted, but in the process, she was like very much like, I trust you guys. You guys do what you want, and responded to the things she saw. And I feel that was a great relationship because you rarely get it, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I do hope that when people see it, they do. I mean, it has also the benefit of being anchored by like these very catchy songs.
Uh-huh.
So I do feel, and the visuals that we came up with, even though they're like kind of like different from what's out there, like I do feel the mixture makes people, you know, it's gonna be good for kids. I feel.
Yeah. And this is coming out sometime
November. I'm not sure when.
November.
Or something.
Okay.
It'll be out in HBO, the platforms and TV. I think.
That's fantastic. Something else I wanted to talk to you about is I noticed that you've been sort of a part of a lot of animation collaboration projects. That's something that you know, when I was looking through your work, because I saw the Toonami intro, and then there was another. It escapes me, but I noticed that you like to sort of bring in people and have a very.
Disjointed, maybe.
I think that might have been it, but yeah, just kind of a diverse array of art styles kind of put together, which is, for me, it reminds me of old internet collaborations when artists used to do that a lot. What is that? Is that something that, I mean, is that something you enjoy in terms of seeing everybody's individual like quirks come through, I'm guessing, or?
Well, it's I've been very active in the festival circuits. You know, that's I love festivals and I love going because I am a huge fan of animation shorts. So when I get a film into a festival, I usually try to go meet people. And I've also been associated with people, you know, I don't know if you're aware of GLASS, the GLASS Animation Festival, which is, it's a very young festival. It's going on its 4th year.
Okay.
It's been put together by Jeanette Bonds, she lives here in Los Angeles. But it's about getting into a community of, you know, people that do different stuff in animation that is not necessarily industry oriented. Very much responds to my sensibilities of wanting to do something different and unique. And because of that, and because of my trajectory at the studio, that was my first directing job at Titmouse, which was a huge opportunity because they basically said, Adult Swim wants to pay like homage to the 20th anniversary of Toonami, and they want to do an exquisite corpse. Choose 30 people that you think are cool, and just bring them in and work with them, and put together whatever you want. You know, like so we worked with Jason DeMarco at Adult Swim because that's his creation, Toonami, Tom the robot, and we came up with a concept. Chose the artists and let them go crazy, and then at the end it was just getting the parts and kind of like putting them together. But definitely there was a huge satisfaction for me because it was the first time that I could approach people that I admired and say like, do you want a job? Like, do you want to work?
Yeah.
You want to do 5 seconds of animation? And it was an insanely gratifying experience because when you approach somebody with like, I admire your work, do you want to get paid for it? It's very satisfying, and it gives
like paying
voice.
it forward. You finally get to give back to something.
And these are people that are, in their own rights, are very successful. I'm not like picking somebody out of the shadows. It's more like a bunch of, you know, but you know, most animators are very nice people, and they're like happy to work in this kind of like environments, especially if there's trust built.
Yeah.
So that's the good thing about going to festivals is that you meet people face to face, and then if they live in Japan and you reach out to them, they most likely say like, oh, sure, you know, bring it on. And so the Toonami Exquisite Corpse was that. It did really well. It got into festivals as well. And that led to the Disjointed project, which was it's just 10 animators doing a minute for this Netflix show. So they wanted to explore some live action characters, kind of like emotions and feelings through animation, but non-narrative. Like if this character has like an attack of anxiety, how would you represent it? So it was a nice project because it was like, who depicts anxiety in their films the best? And I would like get to go through a directory and choose somebody. That was very nice.
That's like casting. Yeah. It's interesting to hear a lot of what you talk about because I think they always say that animation or character animation is almost like acting in slow motion. You know what I mean? Like that's how I've heard it described by especially guys who do CG stuff, where they're really thinking about performance and body language and designing the, you know, I guess that goes with 2D too, designing a very clear storytelling pose. And there's so much overlap that people don't realize, because I think on a superficial level, people say, oh, this is live action, and then this box over here is the people who draw pictures. And to hear about how you, just sort of seeing who does what emotion the best is the same way that you think, Robert De Niro is good at being like the angry guy or whatever, you know what I mean? So it's very much the same sort of thinking, right?
It's this type of films or animators that I usually relate to would say, it's the experience of watching these things some of them are narrative, but to me it's more about like going to a museum and watching seeing like Guernica's Picasso, you know. There is a story there, but what gets you is the emotion behind it. So I feel like that's what I pursue. I am slowly trying to get more into like narrative, conventional, like Aristotelian, like 3 acts kind of thing.
Sure.
Just for my own like personal, development. But to me, at the end, this is an art form that it's about like touching something. You can do it in both ways, but it's specifically the one that I kind of like.
Yeah, I think for people who follow the more conventional structure, I think you can still. I think about a guy like Chris Sanders and Dean Dubois, and how Dean concerns himself maybe with like the skeleton or the outline, and then within those parameters, then you have the places where you get to have that very intense, either like an expression of emotion that comes out really strong. And that's where I think Chris Sanders, who's more of just like, ooh, look, shiny, let's go to that thing, like he then comes in and adds that touch. So I think if you look at the films that they've both worked on together, that's a pretty good example of having the rules, but then within that space, having those really intense filmic or artistic moments, which is
and there is a thing that going back to history and without leaving like the continent or hemisphere, if you think of like classic Disney, and that's all in like the Illusion of Life book. It's like if you think of Pinocchio, it's like, or these are like drawings, but they express so much emotion that is a level of mastery of the technique that I don't think I have yet. I do think like the way that I approach it is a little bit more effective. It's like it's color, so it just hits you in like the eyes and the brain processes the thing. But the other one I think is more subtle, and I do want to pursue it. The film that I'm now working on, which is being produced by Titmouse, I am challenging myself that without losing the kind of like the visceral kind of like aspect of it, I do want to try to connect people with a character that is experiencing subtle emotions without the camera going crazy and spinning.
Interesting. Yeah.
So we'll see what comes after that. But I do think that is you get older, you get more like subtle in the way you do things. So I do feel like that's.
I think a lot of artists and filmmakers tend to do that, and then sometimes they do a 180 or a 360.
The 360 leaves you in the same place you started.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking like Ready Player One with Steven Spielberg. It's like he went back to the 80s or something. But and you said that you're going to be working in Japan. Is this in the future for you?
No, I'm just gonna go to. I worked in Japan for like a summer, TBS. I got a film accepted into a festival, a music video.
Okay.
That is unreleased, but I just want to go back. Japan is one of the most. There's been 2 places that I've been and stayed like a considerable amount of time. It's Japan and Cuba, and I do feel like the Cubans have a huge animation history, but we just don't see it because of obvious reasons. But there's a big film school there that Spielberg and Coppola have taught, and I got to go there for a bunch of months, and I was it's also very political, very visceral in a way, ways of making animation, but culturally it's just going to another planet. Japan is the same. Like you go to Japan, and because both are islands, and
pretty
that's
isolationist, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So you get like those. Japan has evolved so differently from Cuba, obviously, but it is still like has the effects of being isolated. And despite that, the fact that we get so much media from Japan, and we kind of certainly know it a little bit because of that, the experiencing that difference certainly moves the brain around, and that's the way you get inspiration.
Yeah, I recently saw Babel. I don't know if you've seen that film, but I think it travels from one location to the next, and yeah, I thought that must have been. I'm sure as a filmmaker, Iñárritu must have had to really soak up a little bit of each culture, so he could sort of maybe be a little bit true to every little story. I was gonna ask you because sorry, just to backtrack a little bit. You started mentioning like Pinocchio and sort of those classic era. Growing up for you, was there certain films that were sort of pivotal in terms of forming, your tastes and sort of forming? I want to eventually do something close to this if I can help it. Like, were there any things like that?
It's definitely the Yellow Submarine. Like that is my parents are very, let's say, liberal in their approach to things, and I lived in England when I was a kid, 5 to 7, something like that. And one of my parents basically raised me. I don't think they were interested in Disney that much because they just liked the things they liked. So they liked Monty Python and they liked the Yellow Submarine,
Sure.
amongst many things.
Sure.
But I remember my father showing me that film, and this is like 5 to 7. But I just have so many vivid images of what happened when I was looking at that film. And going back to today, while I'm making that Emperor's Newest Clothes, and everybody's reaction is like, this is like the Yellow Submarine.
Oh,
and
that's
I
so
wasn't
funny.
like expecting to do it, but it's, I couldn't help it, I guess. And I guess like without saying it to myself, I did, it was like, if I ever get to make something, I will try to make it like the Yellow Submarine.
Yeah, I think a lot of artists and even comedians they worry about this, where it's like, oh, I hope people don't think that I'm straight up copying something. But I think I speak for myself, where it's like I think there are things that you resound to very strongly, and then it's almost like they get buried in your subconscious, and then once you start working, I always think as long as you're not deliberately looking over your shoulder and copying, the color picking the exact color or whatever, that sort of organic process of it welling out is totally fine. I just know some folks who really concern themselves over not doing that. And I think, as long as it's not obviously deliberate, that's a beautiful thing. Like you get to see, I feel like, people are almost a cornucopia of like different influences that all eventually hope to come out in a nice way. So
there's this graphic that I had to make in school to explain my process for a thesis, and it was basically, I described making short films kind of like making perfume. If you know the process is, you basically just put in all these elements and you cook them and you melt them, and then you have to like put them through fire and put them through pressure and distill them. At the end you get like a tiny thing that you hope smells good. So
that's a really great analogy.
Because I do feel like when I start a film, I go, film that I'm making now, it's about clowns. And then this is where the research comes in. Like, what are clowns in society? I don't want to make a generic film about clowns. I want to make a very specific film about clowns. So what are clowns in society? The history of clowns, why people have fear of clowns, imagery of clowns from like the different eras. And it's like just putting that all in your brain and kind of like processing it and filtering it to like, what do I want to say with this? And of course, like a bunch of things come out, like the imagery of clowns is so specific through history. And with the Emperor's New Clothes and the Yellow Submarine, there was a moment it was like, this is the other, it's like, I'm gonna basically put it out there in the film that I know that this looks like this thing. So nobody can go like, you're doing it. So
right.
There are specific moments that it's like not central to the film, but this is homages that if people want to go and say like, this looks like that, and I know this is my way of saying, I know, just move on, enjoy the story.
Yeah.
So, but that was it. And it fell in a time that there was a huge anniversary for the Yellow Submarine recently. I got to see it on film for the first time at the ArcLight.
Oh, nice.
It was a crazy experience. There was a woman taking photos, like this very old hippie, taking photos with a flash, like a very like old time camera, taking photos of the film.
While it's playing and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like, psh, you know, the sound was so crazy. And you look at her, she had like this long white hair. I was like, wow, this is insane. I've seen that film so many times that I didn't mind.
Uh-huh.
But
it kind of added to the ambiance,
yeah,
maybe, with her.
Absolutely. And I was just so happy that this was happening at the time that I was just wrapping this film that I was making. You know, like it felt like a nice point, and I don't know where it's gonna go, but I hope it goes to somewhere that, you know, I can keep doing the same thing.
Yeah, no, I like that you it seems like you try to respect whatever subject matter you're going to jump into, because there's a couple things that I have in the back burner, and I think, you know, I want to get to these eventually, but I understand that in order to do them properly, I'm gonna have to soak up I'm gonna have to do a lot of homework before I can get to these things if I want it to come off right. And so yeah, it's nice that instead of just kind of, you know, bulldozing your way through something and just getting it done, you sort of take a step back and you say, this is important. I need to make sure that I'm looking at all the angles first before I start to get my hands dirty, right? Like,
and there is a thing that I also learned here. I took classes with a Peter Chung, who made Aeon Flux and other stuff. He's an incredible director that has very specific ideas of things, and I kind of knew this before because I sort of started. When you live in a place like Colombia, it's hard for people to, you know, like to define what is going on, because everybody's trying to going their own way, trying to figure it out, which is great in a way because it gives a lot of like different takes on stuff. Once you move here and there's an industry, you start seeing like patterns of the way people behave towards the art making. And one thing that he said and that I sort of had perceived was, if you're not making films about life, you're making films about films. And I do feel like there is a lot of that happening sometimes, in which you're not seeing a person making a film about a thing that has happened or they've experienced or they want to communicate, but they're basically saying with their piece of art, oh, I loved Toy Story. Let me show you my version of Toy Story, you know?
right.
So it degrades a little bit. So I always try to do it people do whatever they want, but for myself, I just want to make things that I feel like, I don't want to make films about films. I want to make films about things that happened to me.
Yeah.
Or, you know, my graduation film for my thesis was about bureaucracy and homeless people. Because at that time I had no car here in Los Angeles, and I had to renew my visa all the time.
Oh my God.
Not having a car meant taking the train.
Oh my
and
God.
Taking the train meant having to walk late at night.
Skid Row.
And there was I lived in downtown, so there was a lot of like homeless people, and it's hard to deal with these things. I have a home, yet I have a house here, yet this is not my home. I had to always like do paperwork to, you know, validate my presence here in the country. And then these people here who probably are citizens, they don't have a house. So it's like these ideas start like, collapsing in the brain, and the perfume making process starts to work, you know, and then that's it's hard for me to just go home and say like, oh, I really like Dragon Ball, I'm gonna make a Dragon Ball film, you know. So
yeah,
kind of comes out.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stuff that that's the cool thing about film is that it's a subtle thing, and it's hard to exactly point. I guess that's when people say a film is inspired, right? Like that is the term where this is like, oh look, this is something that we haven't seen before. We're experiencing feelings that we haven't felt in a film before, and you can't reference it back to anything else. So like, yeah, I think that's important for people, at least for maybe young filmmakers, to consider that. Yeah. Maybe it's like saying writing what you know, right? Like you don't want to. If it's a little bit personal, at least it'll be unique, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, like my first films ever, when I first got Flash, I was still in high school, and they were like South Park, like basically versions of my classmates and my teachers. I mean, I'm not saying like that's, but I was basically ripping off. I designed the characters to be like South Park characters. Like it's fine to be inspired by things.
Yeah.
And especially when you're young, like you just like things and that are cool and on TV. But I feel like as you move through life, and it's better to start to realize like the only value that you can add to this is your take on things. You can be inspired by Yellow Submarine or Toy Story, whatever, but try to like make something that is unique of you, because then if not, then anybody could do it.
Yeah, no. I sometimes get questions online saying, is it cool if I just copy stuff? And I'm like, listen, if you're just starting, that's how everyone started. I have a stack of Ninja Turtle drawings like this, you know what I mean? And it's funny enough because I also did a South Park rendition of people who were in my senior year in college. So yeah, I think it's more than valid, because I think it's, organically, in an ideal way, you will eventually start to find your own style. That's what it is. It was a style question. I said, if I don't have a style, what do I do? I said, don't think about it. Just do what's something that's inspired, and hopefully that'll lead to, more specific things.
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, I'm still searching for it, so I don't know when it's gonna come, like the ultimate thing. But art making is about the questions, not the answers. So,
right. Well, Simon, thanks for being on the show. I think we covered a lot of interesting stuff. Hopefully some people, something to think about, something to chew on when they approach their work. So, yeah.
It's Simón, by the way. That is
Simón.
The only correction. Yeah, but Simon is fine.
Wilches.
Simón Wilches Castro.
Yes.
But yeah, it was great talking to you, man. Like it's always fun. I love the videos you make, and it's I think, it's when I was in Colombia, there was nothing more valuable than finding information about how this thing was made, and I feel like that is what you're doing is great.
Dude, that's totally the inspiration. It's just like, I think of when I was a college student, just begging for to see what working people, what was in their heads. So yeah. That's awesome. I'm glad that you saw that.
Awesome. Cool.
Well, cool, man.
Awesome.
All right, well, that'll be it for Shot Talk, and we'll see you guys next week.
If you like this episode of Shot Talk and would like to see more episodes in the future, join the Shot Talk Patreon at patreon.com/Shot Talk. You'll get access to private Discord servers, Q&A opportunities for the guests, and more. Also, if you're enjoying these beats, you can follow me at jetsy.bandcamp.com. Thanks, and see you next time.